Okay, this is a podcast for Standard 4.5. In this podcast, we're going to be looking at how the muscular and skeletal systems work with our other systems to allow for movement and support. We're also going to take a look at how our bones are used for producing our red and white blood cells. So you'll be able to distinguish between the three types of muscle tissue. You'll also distinguish between bones and cartilage. We'll tell the difference between ligaments and tendons. And we're going to talk about how your musculoskeletal system works with your other body systems to provide movement for the entire body. And we'll recognize that bones produce our various blood cells. Okay, so here's some of the vocabulary that we're going to see in here. A lot of this is probably fairly familiar to you, but we'll take it and go through each one as we go. So your musculoskeletal system, the main jobs of your musculoskeletal system, there's four things that we can kind of say they do. One is for the protection of your internal organs. Both your bones and muscles do this protection, but your bones obviously are going to do that more so. So your skull is going to protect your brain, your rib cage is going to protect your heart. A lot of protection that's going to happen with your skeletal system. Movement and support of the body. Without your skeleton, you wouldn't have the shape that you have. You would just be kind of a big blob of skin and muscle. You also wouldn't be able to move because your muscles are attached to your bones, and that's what actually allows you to move around. So you need both that movement and support for your musculoskeletal system. We do get to store minerals, especially calcium, in our bones, and calcium is an important component for our muscle contractions, so we have to have a lot of calcium around. And that calcium is going to get used in later places, so we have large stores of it in our muscle, and that's also one of the things that helps our muscles to stay strong. And then we also have blood cell production, which mainly happens in our bones, especially our long bones. So we're going to make our various red blood cells as well as lots and lots of different kinds of white blood cells. And a lot of that production does happen within the bone marrow of our bones. Okay, we're going to start by talking about the different types of muscle. So there are three main types of muscles that are found in the human body. You have skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Skeletal muscle is called that because it's attached to the skeleton of our body, so it's attached to bones. Smooth muscle tends to make up our different organs, like our stomach. Not every organ is made of smooth muscle, but organs that have to be able to move to do their jobs are made of smooth muscle. And then cardiac muscle is found only in the heart. It's a specialized muscle for that incredibly important, strong organ of the body. Okay, so let's start by taking a closer look at our skeletal muscle. There's actually over 600 different kinds of skeletal muscles in your body. And you might know some of the major groups of them, like the deltoids, and you have your deltoids here, you have your quadriceps, which are the muscles on the front of your leg. But there's a lot of even really, really small ones between each of your fingers. There's tons of different muscles within your face. So each of them gets their own name. So there's over 600 different named muscles in the body. All of these muscles that are skeletal muscles are voluntary. That means that they are muscles that you can control. And they are all connected to the bones of the skeleton, and they are connected to the bones by tendons. So every single one of these is connected by one bone connects to another bone through these muscles. And so when you are going to move, your muscles are actually pulling on bones, and that's what's allowing for the movement to happen. Okay, so when your muscles contract and relax, that is what is producing the movement that you see. So we're going to take a look at how these muscles actually go about contracting and relaxing. At the microscopic level, it's kind of neat what your muscles are able to do to allow for this movement to occur. Okay, so when we take a look at a muscle contraction, so our muscles are actually made up of lots and lots of muscle fibers, which are individual muscle cells, and they work together collectively to allow for the large movements that we're able to do. So the muscle fibers contain special proteins called myofilaments, and there's two main types of these proteins. There's actin and myosin. Actin are thin filaments that are used in a muscle contraction, and myosin are thick ones. And basically what happens with these guys is they are overlapped within your muscles, and they are going to literally move when your muscles contract and relax, and that's what's going to make your muscles shorten and lengthen as they contract. Okay, so the actin and myosin overlap each other repeatedly, and they actually end up forming these functional units within your muscles that are called sarcomeres. And this is where the contraction actually happens, is at these spots called the sarcomeres. The arrangements of the sarcomeres next to each other is actually what makes our skeletal muscle look like it has striped appearance. So that's called striations, because the actin and myosin, as they are next to each other, make light and dark bands, and so it looks like your muscles are striped. And a muscle contraction occurs as the actin and myosin fibers are going to slide past each other during a muscle contraction. Okay, so we're going to take a look at a diagram, kind of just showing you generally what this whole thing will look like as it's put together. Okay, so here we have our muscle, like in our arm. Okay, here's an individual muscle fiber, so you can kind of see that there's like this striped appearance going on. And that's because if you take a look at what one little piece of this muscle looks like, you can see that there are dark areas and then there are lighter areas. And as you look at one of these areas, this is called a sarcomere. So you've got these thicker fibers in the middle, those are your actin, and then the thinner ones on the outside are your myosin. And during a muscle contraction, the actin fibers are actually going to get pulled towards each other. And as they get pulled in towards each other, that makes the muscle shorten, and that is the muscle contraction that will happen. All right, the second kind of muscle tissue that we'll talk about is smooth muscle. This is found mainly in internal organs like your digestive tract, your diaphragm. These things are smooth muscle. Only organs, though, that need to do movement in order to perform their jobs are made of smooth muscle, so your liver is not made of smooth muscle. This is responsible for involuntary functions, so things that you do not control. You don't have to think about them to make them happen. So this is unconscious movement. So if you think about, if you had to think about every breath that you took, that's pretty much all you'd be doing is thinking about every breath that you take, because you take a breath about 18 times a minute. It really wouldn't leave you with much time to think about doing anything else. So our brain takes over and just makes these things happen for us, and our smooth muscle is able to do that. Okay. An example of that, peristalsis in the esophagus. Every time you swallow, it starts this process of peristalsis where you are moving the food down to your stomach. You don't have to think about that happening. It just happens. Blinking your eyes is also an involuntary action that happens in your body. All right, cardiac muscle is our third type. This is the muscle of the heart, and it is found only in the heart. It is also an involuntary muscle, and every single time that your heart beats, 60 to 80 times a minute, your cardiac muscle is contracting. So it is a very, very hard-working, muscle that you have in your body. And it actually has a special kind of basket weave structure to it, which makes it incredibly strong. Somebody who has a heart attack, there actually are some of their cardiac muscle is dying, and once enough cardiac muscle has died, then the heart can no longer beat efficiently, and that is when you'll have heart failure. Okay, now talking about your skeletal system, your skeleton. The bones of the body, you have about 206 bones. That's the average. Some people have one more or one less, but the average is 206. And those bones are separated into two skeletons, in a sense. Your axial skeleton is going to provide support and for the body and balance. So it's basically the axis of your body. So if you look right here, this whole area right down the middle. So that includes your spinal column, your rib cage, and your skull. And these are providing a lot of support, as we said. Also, a big thing that your axial skeleton provides is protection. If I could spell it correctly, protection. Your skull is protecting your brain. Your rib cage is protecting your heart and lungs. Your spinal column is protecting your spinal cord. Okay, so a lot of protection has to happen with the axial skeleton as well. Your appendicular skeleton are your appendages. These are the peripheral parts of the skeleton. They allow for gross movements like walking and lifting and stuff like that. And this is mainly your arms and legs, as well as the pectoral girdle and the pelvic girdle that they're attached to. So all the big movements that we do in our body, that's what your appendicular skeleton is for movement, whereas your axial is giving support, balance, and protection to all of your internal organs. Okay, so here's just another picture of that. So you have your axial skeleton is this one down the middle, and then your appendicular in this picture is shown in this kind of purplish pink. All right, so we're going to take a look at the structure of bone. Okay, now your bone is actually made of living cells. They're called osteocytes, and they have a constant blood supply, so there's a large amount of blood actually going into your bones through blood vessels. They have the ability to grow and develop. As they're growing, they're changing from cartilage into bone. Once you are done growing, then you have complete bone. There are different types of bone that make up your typical bones. You have compact bone. This is very hard and dense bone, and it's typically found all along the outside, the outer edge of the bone. So it gives a lot of support and protection for the bone. So that's your whole outer layer. And this is where your minerals like calcium are going to be stored, and that calcium gives that compact bone a lot of strength. So somebody who has like osteoporosis, that means they have low calcium in their bones, and their bones become brittle. Because they don't have enough calcium, it makes it so the compact bone is not quite as strong. Okay, spongy bone is all on the inside, and most of our bones are made up of the spongy bone on the inside. This is lightweight and strong bone. It is not soft and spongy like a sponge. They call it spongy bone because it looks like a dried sponge. So it actually has holes in it, but allows for good shock absorption within the bone, so that, you know, if you were to jump up and down, you don't feel a strong, sharp wave going through your body. Like if you were to take a metal rod and hit it against a desk, it would give a lot of vibration. Our bones would do that if we were all compact. The spongy bone makes it so they're much more lightweight and can take shock a lot better. If our bones were 100% compact bone, we'd weigh probably 600 pounds rather than, say, the 150 that you might weigh. Okay. A joint is a site where two bones come together, and the ligament is a piece of connective tissue that holds those two bones together at any given joint. Okay. Bone marrow is the internal part of a bone. There's two different types. There's red and yellow bone marrow. Okay. Bone marrow is primarily, or red bone marrow, is where many of our blood cells are made. So the red bone marrow, this is found kind of all throughout our spongy bone. There's all sorts of bone marrow within there. So this produces a lot of your red blood cells, as well as some of the white blood cells and platelets that your body needs. And then your yellow bone marrow is made of fat cells. Your yellow bone marrow is a storage site for fat, extra energy, and it's found mostly right in the center of the bone in a place called the medullary cavity. So your red bone marrow here, you got your bone marrow in the medullary cavity as well as in all of the spongy bone kind of surrounding everything, and it's going to make all the different kinds of cells, mostly our red cells as well as the platelets, but there's also a bunch of different kinds of white blood cells that can be made with your bone marrow. All right, now cartilage is a flexible tissue that is part of the skeletal system. It is very movable, but it is also very strong. So, you know, your ear is cartilage, the top of your ear, your nose, it's movable, but you can't just like tear it off. It's strong. It allows, one of the things your cartilage does, it's protective. It allows your ribcage to be protective, but it also allows for some movement. So remember, your ribcage needs to open and close as you breathe. And so the fact that there's cartilage within there allows it to have that little bit of movement so that your lungs have room to expand. A fetus, a baby as it's developing, is mostly cartilage, and then as you grow, that cartilage changes over to bone. So a baby that's born has closer to 300 separate bones, and then by the time you're an adult, you're at the 206, because a lot of those bones have met up and become one single bone, whereas in a baby there's multiple bones. That's why babies are really flexible. They tend not to break bones when they're learning how to walk and they're falling all the time. They don't break bones when they're falling all the time because they're still mostly cartilage at that point. All right, so you have to have both muscles and bones in order to move. So remember that muscles connect to bones by tendons. So a muscle is going to grab onto a bone by a tendon. Okay, and a muscle is going to pull on the bone when the contraction happens, and that causes the bone to move. So whenever you're thinking about movement, it's your muscles are pulling on your bones, and then that is what's making the movement happen. Okay, your muscles also work in pairs. So whenever you have one muscle on one side contracting, the opposite muscle is relaxing. Okay, so when one contracts, the opposing one is relaxing. You can think about this in a lot of different places. There's pairs of muscles, like in your leg. Your quadriceps are in the front of your leg and your hamstrings are in the back of your leg. When one of those is contracted, like when your quadriceps are contracted, your leg is straight and your hamstrings are relaxed at that point. Okay. Another example of that is in your arm. To bend the arm at the elbow, your bicep has to contract. But at the same time, your tricep, which is the muscle behind your arm, is relaxed. And then when you straighten it, the opposite happens. A tricep is what's going to contract, and your biceps will be relaxed. And remember, a contracted muscle gets shorter. So you can kind of see here when you look, the bicep bulges up a little bit when it's contracted because the muscles are actually getting shorter. And when it's relaxed, it's in a longer state. Okay, so all of this movement that we've been talking about with our musculoskeletal system takes energy. Okay, so the digestive system provides food to the cells, and that's going to give us our energy. The respiratory system is going to provide oxygen that's needed for cellular respiration, because remember, our muscles have to use a lot of energy in order to contract. We just talked about cellular respiration, how cellular respiration, when there's oxygen available, you can make up to 36 ATP, so this is why we need that oxygen, so that oxygen gets provided by our respiratory system. Okay, the circulatory system delivers the food and the oxygen to the cells. And remember, your nervous system is controlling this whole entire process. Okay, so that is our musculoskeletal system. We put that in here now because we're using energy, we're using cellular respiration to get the energy to make that movement happen.